Hello everyone, just a quick thing before the video starts. I do apologize for the video and the audio quality. It is not the best, unfortunately. We recorded this over Zoom, which apparently only allowed us to export the video in 360p, so it's not going to look the best. And also, my audio quality is not great because I had to have Jonathan record this video because I could not get it to work on my end. So his audio sounds great, mine is not as great, but you can still hear me just fine. So just want to put that out there before the video starts. I apologize, the quality's not the best, but I hope you still enjoy the video regardless. Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today, we have a very special video because I have a very special guest on today. I have my friend Jonathan Koan, who some of you may know because I feel like we probably have a lot of overlap in the types of stuff we talk about, so I'm sure some of you may know him. But today we are going to be doing a video about the Cosmere because we both love the Cosmere and Brandon Sanderson. And we decided to do our top three favorite and least favorite Cosmere books. So I think the way that we're going to format this is I'll do my number three and then your number three, so we can end with your number one for least favorites, and then do the same thing again for favorites. I think is the way we can do that.
That sounds good.
So my number three least favorite was hard to pick. My other two were easy, pretty much, but my number three was a bit difficult. I picked The Hero of Ages. Also, I should mention I limited myself to one book per series because otherwise my top three would just be Stormlight Archive. So there's that. But I picked Hero of Ages, which hurts because I really like Hero of Ages. But when I first read it, I thought that a lot of the beginning parts were a bit of a drag. Um, I thought like Spook storyline didn't quite grab me a huge amount. And this may change when I reread it because I plan to reread it here in a couple months, the whole trilogy. But I felt like that and a lot of the book to me wasn't as memorable as books one and two. But I do really like Sazed in Hero of Ages. He's my favorite character in the trilogy, and I loved his arc in that book. And I think the ending was tremendous. Like the ending of Mistborn Era 1 is one of my favorite endings in any book I've read. And so that's my number three. It's one that I like a lot, but it has a lot of things that I just wasn't into for a good chunk of the book. So.
I gotcha. Of the Mistborn books, of the original Mistborn trilogy, Mistborn, Wall of Ascension, Hero of Ages, I would probably put Hero of Ages last as well. However, I still think in the terms of the grand Cosmere, I think it's somewhere in the middle for me. There's books I like less, there's books I like more, so it doesn't exactly make my list.
Yeah, it's hard for me to do, especially where I was limiting myself a little bit just for some variety. Because like you said, it would be kind of middle tier-ish for me. But even then, like it would be in the bottom half probably if I were to rank all of them. But that's just because there's so much that I love that it just gets pushed down. So.
Yeah, I gotcha. Like even all of my least favorites on here are still great books. They're just
Yes.
not as great as others.
That's another thing I should mention. I would give all of my least favorites minimum like 7.5 out of 10.
Yes.
Like they're still good. They're
Absolutely.
just not amazing.
Absolutely. I totally agree. So for my number three, I went with actually the most recent Cosmere book I read, and that is Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. This is one of the Secret Project number 3. This is set in the Cosmere. The narrator is Hoyd, which is really interesting. Although the Hoyd's voice doesn't come through quite as strong as it does in Tress of the Emerald Sea, which is one of the reasons I think Tress works better. Here it's kind of like Hoyd's the narrator, and but he's not like focused as a narrator. I enjoyed the book. I enjoyed the world building. I enjoyed the characters, the romance. It's a little bit of a cheesy romance that's going on here. The kind of body switching shenanigans, I can't get into more for spoilers sake, but the body switching shenanigans in this book is pretty funny and entertaining. The one thing that I just don't particularly love in this book is how involved the magic system gets towards the end of the book. I am by nature more into soft magic systems. I don't want to have to think
Mhm.
about the magic while I'm reading a book. I'm more just about the fun of the story, the fun of the characters, things like that. So that type of when it really you really have to think about it a lot towards the end, I get a little stressed. That being said, I think the ending of this book is great. So that's why it's my number three.
All right. Well, I have no opinion on that one yet because I am going to read that next month. Is my
Hey!
plan.
Oh,
I should
that's
have
perfect
mentioned that
timing.
I'm not caught up on it yet. The Cosmere. I have a couple books left. That is one of them, but I am really looking forward to it because it sounds really interesting and unique for Sanderson. So
That is a
it
good
should
one
be
to pick
fun.
for next month, though. I
Yeah.
I see what you did there.
I,
Yeah.
so my number two is one that I know you're going to disagree with, but
Oh
I
dear,
think that
break my
should be
heart.
fun. My number two is Elantris.
Okay, okay, throwing
I
down.
So I for a while I thought this was my least favorite, but as I've thought on it more, I don't think it is. But again, I like a lot of things in it. I really like the world and the concept of it, of the Shiod, or is that what it's called? I think that's what
I
it's called.
thought it was the Shayode.
Sheod, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that happens to people that makes them go to Elantris because they're zombies or whatever. I think that is a really cool idea, and a lot of the world building. I really like the mystery of it, of trying to uncover like why it is this thing is happening. I think the magic's really cool, but and I also really like some of the characters. I really like Crathen and Galadon. They're two of my favorite characters in the Cosmere. I would say not on the same level as some other ones from Stormlight Archive for me, but in the grand scheme of the Cosmere, they are two of my favorites. I would say. And I really enjoyed a lot of the themes. There's a lot of really interesting um, themes in this book and things like that. But I just find it to be one of the less memorable ones. And that's the main reason why it falls for me. And I also think, it's his first published book. So I think that by its nature, it's not going to be as engaging for some people. Um, but yeah, so that's why I picked it for number two.
I will reserve comment on that one. Um, that should let you know where it is on my list. All right.
Yes.
My number two least favorite is again still a book I think is really good. Is Bands of Mourning. The
Mm,
only this is the third of the four Wax and Wayne books. I read the first three Wax and Wayne books relatively close together, boom, 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 during
yeah,
the pandemic,
I did too.
actually. And I of all the Cosmere books, this is the one I remember the least. I didn't have anything that I remember disliking particularly about the book, but the when I go back and I flip through and I think about what happens in the book, I'm like, I don't really remember that as well. It didn't stick out to me. It didn't stay with me. Like the first Mistborn trilogy stuck with me. The Stormlight Archive has,
Mm,
for the most part, stuck with me. The even the secret projects and standalones have all stuck with me, but there's just something about Bands of Mourning that it just the story I went in and I processed it, and then afterwards I can't really remember. I remember I'll say I liked Lost Metal much more, and I liked the other
mm.
two in this much more. But Bands of Mourning I just was largely forgettable, even though I enjoyed it when I was reading it, which is why it's probably lower down.
Yeah. Bands of Mourning, I actually considered for my number three. It was between that and Hero of Ages, but I gave the edge to Bands of Mourning just because I feel like it was maybe a little bit better in some ways.
Hmm.
But it is definitely one of the lower ones for me. Also, I do really like the end of the book. I think there's some cool stuff that happens towards the end of the book, but I can definitely understand it being pretty low for a lot of people, or at least for you. So, my number one least favorite goes also to an Era 2 book, which is going to be Alloy of Law.
Mm.
So, this one, similar to Elantris, I just don't find as memorable as a lot of other ones. The other two Era 2 books that I've read, I still haven't read Lost Metal, but two and three to me have a lot of moments that I remember very vividly, whereas Alloy of Law really doesn't. Alloy of Law, I think, was a good intro to the world of Era 2. Seeing the way things have changed was really cool. And cool intro to the characters, Wax and Wayne, and all the others. And I thought the villain was actually really interesting also, but I just find it not as memorable. Like, I think back to that book and I can remember almost nothing that happened in it, which is not the case for most of the other Cosmere books. So that's the main reason why it falls down there for me.
See, I got you because Alloy of Law for me worked really well because it felt the closest to like a Sherlock Holmes novel.
Yeah.
It really to me felt like Brandon Sanderson's Sherlock Holmes. Throw in magic, switch the personalities, make the Sherlock character more straightforward and Wax, and make the Watson character the crazy zany one in Wayne.
Yeah.
That was a great dynamic. I think that made it great for me. I can understand why other people don't like it as much because it's the least Sanderson of all the Cosmere novels. I think it's a bit different than he normally writes, but I quite enjoyed it. My least favorite is gonna be I know I'm gonna get hate for this, is Warbreaker. This is probably overall my
That's
least.
Oathbringer.
Oh, that's what I meant to say. Oathbringer. Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. This is the. I knew what I still held up the right book. This is the book I meant.
Yes, that's good at least.
Yes, this is the one book where I was overwhelmed reading it. I thought that the Sanderlanche was just too much in this book. Like it felt like if like Endgame, you know how Endgame is, it's like three acts, and the last act is an hour long, and it's really big. It's that big battle sequence and stuff. It felt like if you had Endgame's final act for like 300 pages, it just kept going on and on and on. And whereas something like he does that in his Wheel of Time book, Memory of Light, where the last battle book is like 350 pages, the difference is in that book, it was the last book of the series. It felt like the grand finale of everything. And then you come here, this is only book 3 of 10. It's not even the end of the first era, the first, half of Stormlight. It's only the end of it's only the end of this book. So I thought that was an interesting choice. Although, I mean, there's stuff in this book I still love. I thought that Hoyd's story to Shallan in this book is fantastic. Brandon's talked about turning this into a like a children's book, that story, and I was like, I love that. I would totally buy that. And then
Hoyt stories in general are always good.
Yes, so. Yes, indeed. I also loved some of the stuff in Shadesmar, some of the stuff in with certain character dynamics. I liked some of the dynamic of Shallan and Adolin in this book. So I still had stuff I enjoyed about it, but that Sanderlanche, whoo, that is the one time I was like, you went too far, too much. So.
Well, that is my Elantris book for me. So I will reserve most of my comments on that for later. But I can understand like the Sanderlanche, especially, it is really long, especially even compared to the other Stormlight books. Like when I read Rhythm of War recently, it was like half as long. The Sanderlanche was. So I can understand that for sure. It's a lot, definitely. I guess we'll do favorites now. So I will go with my first favorite. My number 3 is going to be Shadows of Self. Interestingly enough, because Alloy of Law was my least favorite. Shadows of Self so far is arguably my favorite Mistborn book. It is hard to say because I really like the first 2 Era 1 books also. And we'll see how I feel after I reread them soon. But Shadows of Self just had a lot of stuff in it that I really liked. I really liked the character dynamics in it. I really liked Wax and Wayne also, and all the other different characters that are in it. A lot of good character stuff. I really liked the connections that it had to Era 1. The first book, like you saw the way the world had changed, but I feel like the second book had a lot more direct connections to Era 1, which I really enjoyed. There was a lot of cool action. There's a particular action scene. I believe it's a party or a dinner scene or something like that. I can't.
Yeah,
Yeah. I remember that scene, and like my jaw was on the floor the whole time, like this is awesome. And that's another thing, is I think it had a lot of memorable scenes like that, and there was a couple other ones also that I'm not going to talk about because they're spoilers. But I also love the ending of this book, which broke my
Mhm.
heart a little bit.
Yes.
So like overall, like all good things to say about it, really. I really like it a lot.
The ending twist to this book is one of the most jaw-dropping moments, jaw-drop inducing moments of the Cosmere.
Yes,
It
definitely.
was and it was set up perfectly from book one.
Mm.
So I really appreciated the ending here. I do like the ending of this book. So
Yeah, that surprises me, or that surprised me in terms of the way it connected to the first book. Because I had
yep.
heard like Sanderson say the first book was a standalone, basically, and
Yep.
then the other books kind of are the core part of the series. So I was surprised to see such a big connection between the first two books in terms of that. So that was really cool.
Yes, he lied. He lied to us. So my number three Cosmere book. I almost, when I was going through this list, I almost made them all standalones, but I was like, no, I feel like one of the series books needs to make it on here. And it did. So my number three favorite Cosmere book is gonna be Words of Radiance. I
Mm.
really like this one. Everyone talks about Way of Kings. Everyone talks about their love of Way of Kings. They talk about Kaladin's journey in Way of Kings. They talk about how that is like one of their favorite books of all time. This book, I was like, I liked Kaladin in this book much more. I mean, he's still mopey and stuff in this book, but his journey, I think, is much more enjoyable in this book. I really like where he ended up. I thought the Sander Lanch in this book was fantastically produced. I thought that the whole climax sequence of events is just really well done. I thought that Adolin and Shallan were handled well. This is the book that has a lot of Shallan's backstory, which I thought was really
Mm.
good. Even though I guess maybe I think the best backstory would probably be from me, Kaladin, in Way of Kings, but Shallan's is really high up there here. And then seeing the political world building here, this book, it didn't feel like it had quite as much of the spiritual world building as books 3 and 4. I felt like Oathbringer and Rhythm of War focused more, had a little bit more of Dalinar's spiritual stuff. This one, it
Mm.
was more the political stuff, and like the arena fight that
Oh yeah,
Kaladin has in this book is just fantastic. I mean,
it's
that's
one of the most iconic moments in the whole series.
oh,
So
absolutely. Yes. And then Kaladin's his connection with both Dalinar and his connection slash rivalry kind of with Adolin is interesting. So I
mm.
yeah, I just I really of all the the series books, particularly the Stormlight books, this is my favorite Stormlight book.
Yes. Words of Radiance, controversial opinion, is maybe my least favorite Stormlight book.
Ha!
It goes back and forth with Rhythm of War, although I think Words of Radiance is probably the stronger one, but I find Rhythm of War more memorable. But that might just be because I read it more recently. But it is a really good book, and like all four Stormlight books, like if I were to not vary my list like I did, all four Stormlight books would be at the top for me for Cosmere. So like it's still above the rest, but it is probably my least favorite of the four. But yeah. So my number two is going to go to Warbreaker, which is the first of the standalones I read, which was I read Mistborn Era one, and then I read Warbreaker, and it is one that is still held up for me over time, that I still find memorable and I still look back on very fondly. I really love Light Song in this book. At the time, he was my favorite Cosmere character. He's still up there. A bunch of Stormlight characters have taken his place since, but he's still pretty high up there. I thought he was wonderful, and I really liked his comedy, and even like his character arc across the book. Like the ending of the book, the resolution to his arc, almost made me cry. So I loved him in this book. I really liked Siri and Susebron's dynamic that they had. That was really cool. I also really liked, again, kind of similar to Elantris, some of the themes. There was some really interesting religious themes in here with the focus on gods and things like that. That was really cool. And of course, it introduced Vasher and Nightblood, who appear later in other books that I won't spoil. But this is not their final appearance, and it was great to get them introduced. The only downside to this for me is I was not as much into Vivenna's side of the story. Like kind of the whole middle section of the book dragged a little bit for me in some parts. But otherwise, I absolutely love this one.
So that is perfect timing because Moorbreaker is also my number 2. So we lined
I
up.
had a feeling.
So I love Wartbreaker. It's in my list of not just top tier Cosmere novels, but one of my top novels of all time, favorite novels. A lot of the same stuff you said. Ciri and Susebron's dynamic and relationship, Light Song's character journey and religious journey is really great. Also, Vivenna. So the first time I read it, I was with you that all I wanted was Ciri and Susebron. That's all I wanted. And Light Song was great. He was so entertaining. And then it felt like Vivenna was the one plot line that was kind of like taking up space, and that was like let's get over back to let's get back to the main group. When I reread this and listened to it on audiobook, Vivenna's storyline was so much more impactful, and now I would put her up there in her storyline with Ciri and Susebron and with Light Song. I thought that her Vivenna's journey, without spoiling it, I'll be vague here, but her journey of leaving home to try to rescue Ciri, her journey of working with this group to try to save her, then the difficulties she encounters and basically dropping to having nothing, and then being raised back up and having to work with the person she has to work with. I thought that was all fantastically written. And I love the magic system here. This is one of the few times where I felt the magic system was perfect. Not too simple, not too complex. It was just right. Loved it. So that is my number 2.
All right. Well, it's good to know we at least agree on something. So
we're about to disagree on some stuff.
Oh yeah. So my number 1 is going to be Oathbringer.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So I love Oathbringer. Oathbringer not only is my favorite Sanderson book, but it is maybe my favorite book that I have read. Like Sanderson in general is just at the top of everything I've read, so by default I just go with Oathbringer. I loved basically everything about it. So it is slower paced, I think, than the first 2 books and even the fourth book in some ways, but I think that really allowed for me to really get invested in it a bit more, to really kind of just soak things in a bit more. I loved Dalinar. I think his flashbacks are the strongest in the series. Although Kaladin's probably second, but I loved his flashbacks and learning more about him and how tragic and horrible his past was, and all that stuff. A lot of great characters. The only character that I was disappointed by, I would say, was Kaladin, because he is my favorite character in the series, and I wouldn't say he got sidelined in Oathbringer, but he definitely got a much smaller role than in the other 3 books. So that's the one character thing that I wasn't into, but I loved all the other characters. I love Shallan. I really like Teft in this book. This is the book where I really got into Teft.
Oh, yeah.
And like I said, Dalinar and everyone else is great. I also really like some of the revelations in this book. There was some really cool world and lore revelations in Oathbringer that I loved. And the Sanderlanche I actually really liked. It's hard for me to pick a favorite Sanderlanche in the Stormlight Archive. It's probably between Oathbringer and Rhythm of War, actually. But I loved the Sanderlanche and Oathbringer. Even though it was super long, it was like, as I got to the end of the book, I was just like, okay, so, and I knew when it was starting because I started to see the signs that things were starting to happen. I was like, oh, I've got so much of the book left. I get so much cool stuff that's going to happen. And I got very excited about it. So, and there was a lot of moments in the end of that book that I loved. So overall, it's just one that I really like a lot. And I have nothing but praise for it. So,
well, my number 1 is going to be Elantris. which I don't think if anyone who's watched my channel is going to be surprised.
Yes.
This is not similar to you. This is with you with Oathbringer. This is not only my favorite Cosmere novel and Sanderson novel. This is my personal favorite novel of all time. Reread it several times. I love it. Real quickly, the political themes, the way he explores the role of politics and the role of government, I think is great. I loved the way he explored religious themes, the role of not just religion, but the role of faith, the role of ideology and worldview. I thought was great. His exploration of gender roles in society. You have Sereni basically challenging gender roles. I thought was really interesting stuff. And then my favorite plot line of all, of any book I've ever read, is Raoden building up the people of Elantris, basically taking Elantris from being this city that has nothing. It's terrible. There's nothing you can say good about the city. And he all of a sudden turns it into a vibrant place. Everyone's happy with life because he gives them all purpose. His journey and his plot line here is terrific. And then this has, the magic system stuff, I would argue, is harder to understand than Warbreakers. So that's why I say Warbreakers' magic system is, I think, a little bit more fun and interesting to me. But the way that the magic system here interweaves with their religion, I just find really fascinating and really fun. So this is by far my favorite. And it's funny that your favorite and my favorite are also one of your least favorites and one of my least favorites. So it worked out well.
I didn't actually realize that Oathbringer was one of your least favorites before, so that was kind of fun. But I did really enjoy the Raoden plot line, and I think that is for me, maybe the best part of the book, and I really like all of that. And the magic as well, I'd agree, is probably one of the harder magic systems to get in the Cosmere, but I think it is still really cool, and I'm excited to see it explored more once the sequels come out here in however many years it'll be.
Yes. So. There's some authors where we would say if the sequels come out, but I think we can, unless he dies, which I don't think is going to happen. I hope it doesn't happen. But unless that happens, I think we got a good shot that the sequels are going to come out, by 2030.
Yes, definitely. I think that is the plan too, is that like end of the decade, Elantris 2 and 3. So very excited for that. So I guess that's pretty much it. So thank you, Jonathan, for coming and doing this. It was fun.
Yes, thank you for inviting me on. You've done a video on my channel talking about Star Wars: The High Republic, so it's fun that I get to be on your channel now.
Yes. So for those of you who are not familiar with Jonathan, I will have his channel linked in the description, so you can go check out his stuff. I'd highly recommend checking out his channel. I think if you like my videos, you'll probably enjoy his, because we tend to talk about a lot of similar stuff. So that's pretty much it for today. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.
Bye.